completely to enact this, because I feel like it'll be a two-step process that you change.
Go ahead.
Okay, so option 3 is basically saying that new regulations by the government and technological breakthroughs will only scratch the surface of this consumption problem. What really needs to happen is a shift in our culture, which we've been talking about a lot. So basically this is a shift to back to like American values, which are altruism, the pride of making a good life with your own means, and frugality, which means like not spending so much, because we have become such a materialistic culture. We need to stop this, because basically we spend too much money on things we don't like out of emotion for immediate gratification rather than on necessity, and we need to stop that. So my question to you guys is, how would we've been talking about this whole culture thing and how this drastic change needs to happen. What are some steps that you think we need to take to make this culture shift happen?
So that's like the great generation.
Well, I don't think we should stop spending, because we need to spend to stimulate the economy in different businesses. But at the same time, it needs to be sort of a push from the businesses, because like if the businesses don't change how they're going to do and run their operations and that, then people won't have the option to change it all.
Well, this sort of argues that instead of like this whole corporate America, we need to switch more into like community-based businesses, like smaller retail, service businesses, local businesses. Like America's become so corporate, and we need to make the shift back to this like 1950s, like locally grown, like. And of course, this would mean a lot of sacrifices on the individual like level. But what do you guys think? Do you think that switch would impact like America?
I don't know. I go against that switch, because I think we should still have corporations and that, because small businesses in our economy right now, and in a lot of economies, can't thrive at all. Should be wasting lots of money just having all these random startups happening, where you can have multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations that are just thriving now. And if they can make changes, then they have a larger influence than if one business shows up in a small community.
But maybe there should also be regulations in terms of companies that could potentially monopolize a certain area of the market. Because, I mean, when one company monopolizes something, it basically, like, that's the only source of whatever that product is where you can get it from. So maybe if there were more, like, governmental regulations there, so it became a more, like, accessible option to access things through local companies, then I think that might be one step that we can take.
I don't think we need to stop spending. I think people just need to start spending money on the right things, like kind of demand, like better products that are better for the environment. And like here, this shows like there's less people per household and more cars. So if people are willing to give up, they obviously don't need that many cars. So if people were willing to realize that they don't need these things and start spending money on things that were better for the environment and weren't so harmful, then companies would start producing more of that because they produce what the customer wants.
And just as a culture, I think we need to, I mean, it obviously depends on the individual, but as a culture, we celebrate affluence and like diversity in terms of the things you own, and like, oh yeah, I got this, like, you know, like this was shipped from like the Middle East or something like that. So if we were to stop maybe celebrating that as much as we do right now, then that would be, I think, crucial.
But I think a lot of that is American culture specifically. It's not the global culture. Like, it's harder to base our, like, talk about a culture when American culture is so different, and we are so materialistic, and we spend more than what any other culture does. And, like, it's hard to base a model. You can't really use the American model to do that, because we're completely different from, like, any other country.
So maybe if we were to base it on, I don't know, just like, for example, if we were to base it on the current model of, like, the European model, they have, I mean, the things that they eat are more locally grown. They don't necessarily have to ship things over, but at the same time, they do have, like, more access to areas where they can farm and do stuff like that. So maybe if we were to base it on an area of the world where that is being successful for them, then that would work.
what this argues is that if we were to stress, like right now, the focus of our culture is on materialistic items and how much you spend. It argues, it's kind of depressing. It's like we eat too much, we watch too much television, we don't spend enough time with our families, and like as a whole, like Americans are becoming more overweight and like more stressed out, and we have the highest anxiety rates in the world and stuff, and we don't spend enough like. Our numbers of like volunteer work and like getting involved in the community are decreasing a lot from what they were. So do you think that if the stress was more on like a family life, a community life, that this issue of like materialism by like work so hard, spend all your money, do you think like putting more emphasis on your family life would change how we view like our economy and our lifestyle?
I feel like as far as technology goes, like that has a big part in why we're not as cohesive as a family. Because if everyone has some type of technological item that they're focusing their attention on, then they're not going to be together all the time interacting. So I feel like, not that technological advancements have to, like they are a big factor in like this whole thing. So maybe if we were to shift the ideas of like having like the latest, having to have like an iPhone and have all this, like all those different materialistic things that make us spend more time by ourselves and more focused on those material objects rather than being a part of the family and volunteering and things like that, that might help that situation.
Throughout America and
I don't know, I think that it's hard to put a stress on family as much because a lot of people do take an outlet from work, and capitalism is a huge thing, especially in America, where people want to work as much as they can with a job they love and try to stimulate themselves, promote themselves, raise up through the ranks, and stuff like that. And it's hard to push that type of person that's so driven into a family life. And I mean, if you look at it in like a capitalist perspective, like when they're trying to sit there in a corporation, trying to run a corporation, then it's hard for them to come back to their family. I mean, it would be a good thing, but at the same time, if we don't have driven people like that, that are pushing our economy and our world forward, then it's hard, like the world becomes stagnant. We can't just have everybody move back to their family.
I feel like realistically speaking, like this talks about how like people are more unhappy than they used to be. I feel like if all you care about is work and the economy, like where is the rest of it? You need emotional stimulation as well as economical stimulation.
I don't know, a lot of people are fine with just involved in their work, and that's what drives them and makes them happy in life. There's a lot of people that will go just, they wanted, all their life they wanted to go to college, they want to get their master's, and they want to go in research or have their own business or something like that, and that is what made them happy, and that's why they're driven. And I mean, even though they might be emotionless to some, I mean, that's what they personally enjoy.
Do you think that has to do with like any type of shift in culture, or like why more people are driven towards work than
No, it's not a shift in culture at all. It's been throughout the world history. Like you have leaders and stuff like that they try to push through the ranks of their army and become the leader of their country, politicians, corporations, stuff like that. It's not a culture change, it's just how people are in general. Everybody has to go to be driven, or else they're just going to be stagnant and not do anything.
Maybe that's when we have to kind of allow for variation in terms of the areas you could potentially work in. I mean, I don't want to bring this up again, but I mean, if we were just to look at the way the jobs are run in Europe, they have, first off, some of the countries with the, what is the highest, like the highest levels of happiness and satisfaction with their lives, those are generally located in Europe.
It's the Scandinavian, Denmark.
Yeah, Scandinavian countries, like Norway's on there, a lot of those. And it's like they have, first off, they have like longer breaks, they have more vacation time than we do, they have paid a lot longer paid maternity leave than women in this country.
And paternity leave.
Yeah. So like they, I don't know, I guess we just have to offer, like have those options. I mean, there are people, granted, who do want to focus only on whatever they're pursuing. And if that's what makes them happy, that's what's going to make them happy. But there might also be people who do want to focus on family, however their jobs might not allow for it.
I just want to pose two questions. First, for Gage, while I completely agree with you, do you think that although there are people who want to be driven and they like their jobs and that, like being alone is fine for them. Do you think that American society has put such a stress on capitalism that people who would rather be with their families and rather like have a rich family life are forced to be more like the people who are happy with their jobs anyway? And the second question is, the problem with that is, the problem with like the European model is that they pay a lot higher taxes and they're more socialist type government. Do you think people in America would be willing to make that switch at all? Because we have such a stress on
So,
democracy
I guess up to this point.
and capitalism, and you work, so you, like those who work will earn and those who don't.
Direct action.
I really don't think America in general pushes people to do this. It's sort of an option. At the same time, though, I do have to say that you're sort of forced into that scenario because it depends what route you want to take in life. In order to be successful, you can't, like, you have to be driven and you can't fall behind at all. You can't have distractions and stuff like that. So in that respect, yeah, it's pushed on, and it's pushed in a corporate society where you have to, like, push yourself in order to do something like that. But at the same time, it's your option to. If you want to spend time with your family, you can. It just depends what your goals are in life. And when it comes to like the European economies and that, when you have to pay those extremely high taxes, it doesn't work for every country, especially like here, when like we have Obama who's trying to promote universal health care. I mean, that would raise prices, because if you look at Canada, they have the same thing. They have universal health care, but they're paying like 60 or 70% of what, I think it's like 40% of what they make in taxes. And I don't think that would work for everybody here, especially when you're not even making that much. When you're making minimum wage here, I mean, if you're just living off of minimum wage, it's hard enough, but if you're paying like 50% of your money in taxes, just so you can have a few free public services, like that's too much for our economy. And I don't know how it is for the rest of the world, because I mean, some European countries, they can handle that. But for a large majority of people, they can't when they're not making like a lot of money to equal out what they're losing in taxes.
I don't think that as a country we would ever we would ever be able to commit to a more, I guess, socialist economy, potential government, just because we are a melting pot. There's so many different groups of people here that have these different point of views, and to get everyone to be able to agree on such a significant change like that would be asking for a lot. I mean, my parents are they're from Russia, and they come from that exact kind of government, except a lot more strict, and they aren't willing to do stuff like that. They aren't willing to get their taxes raised to be able to put on those free services. So I don't think it's possible. I think depending on how much we might be able to, I mean, like, people were making accusations that Obama was like a socialist and everybody was against that. So I think it would depend on the kind of changes that were being made. If they were like too heavily like that, too heavily European, I guess, say it like that, then people would be really against it. But, and the other thing is that Europe, like, they have kind of like a fallback just in case, because they do have the EU, at least most nations have the EU. So if, like, if we don't have that kind of thing, like America's economy focuses solely on America's economy. So we don't have the kind of backup that a lot of European nations have in case something were to fall through, I guess.
Yeah, and if you have a lot of public policies, then you have the problem of the free rider problem. Because then you have like some people who solely like maybe benefit from these things, but they don't like offer as much. Like if you're not making as much as somebody else that's making a lot more, and you're both getting the same exact benefits, then maybe the person who's making a lot more than you isn't going to work as hard. So now he's making less, and now overall the economy is going to suffer because everybody realizes that no matter what they do, they're still going to lose a large majority in taxes and stuff like that. And then you have people that are sitting there, maybe people that aren't even working, and are just sitting there riding on, like, say, free healthcare, or just public things when they don't have to pay for it. I don't know. There's positives and there's a lot of negatives when you have people that just free ride and then that screws the system up.
There's a negative connotation to trade schools in America. So like I feel like people
just as far as like the whole family thing, I understand what they're saying, and I'm not like that educated in how like the world works in that aspect, but I just feel like just the whole family thing is, it's important. I just don't know how to shift back to that. Everyone just made so much advancement in this direction.
Well, what this advocates is that in school, instead of stressing, I know Jay didn't tell me this, but instead of stressing like, you know, mathematics, hard work, like get a corporate job, like underneath, like gay kids, like gardening,
I'm sorry.
or like
No, me too.
homeschool. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well,
Like, sort of. Never mind. Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
if you want to keep going. Oh, we're using that. Are we still going with that?
We'll still just go with it, as long as you don't mind. Yeah,
It's recorded.
yeah. This is going great.
But that America has made such a drastic shift in one direction that it might be hard to get back to.
Yeah, me too.
It's important for those people who want it, and those other people who don't really want it, we'll figure something out.
Okay, so you just talked about how like focusing more on family would be, and less on like working and stuff would be hard for Americans to do. But say we were to like that would be a possibility. Like we could see that in the future. What effect do you think it would have on like, the economy if people were to stop, you know, working more and be less driven, and you know, focus more on family and community values instead of just working and consuming?
I think that, well, I don't think people need to stop working. Like, obviously, if you have a job and you've been working for years, that's what you're used to. And like Gage said, if people stop focusing on hard work and like making advancements, then our world isn't gonna advance in any way, and it's kind of just gonna set us back. And it's not like the rest of the world doesn't work. Like people in China, like everyone says, like they're the most hardworking culture. So I don't think that is really what we need to do in order to change things about our environment. And the thing about the schools, like teaching kids different things than we are now, you don't have to not teach them like math and science and stuff like that. But if there is going to be a change, you need to like teach them more like of the values that we want to see in our culture. I think that's where we'll start getting somewhere.
Do you think that Americans are like too attached to their lifestyles of consuming and, you know, having an iPhone in their hand all the time, or being on the computer all the time, or playing video games all the time, to make a switch to more traditional American values, like hard work all the time and, you know, not spending excessive amounts of money on things you don't really need? Do you think that as a society we're too attached to that lifestyle?
This is just me, but like I'll get off the computer and get ready to bed, and then as soon as I lie down, I'll start looking at things on my phone. Like, and that's just me. And like I would probably be willing to give stuff like that up, but there are people who spend like hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get like a MacBook or something like that when it has, you know, competitors that are equivalent but and less expensive. It would be very tough for. Like, I mean, we kind of talked about this, I think, the last 2 times, but, like, it would just be very tough to get people to get rid of that mindset that in order for them to seem successful and to be successful, they need the most high-end and expensive products to kind of show that off. I think that takes a lot.
And like I think we said this last time, but once there's like, if there's like a phone out that's like so much more advanced and everything else, people aren't going to go back to something else that they had before if they know there's something better out there. That's just how we are.
Like, because we're always moving forward, and it's hard to, you know, maybe look at what we're doing and take a step back, even though that benefit, you know, the society and the environment, it's like hard to look at that.
I mean, at some point, and I'm not sure if it was option 3, but at some point in this book, they talk about how America just they gave up a lot around like in the 40s during World War II. Like they had like freedom gardens, they had rationed food, like women took up jobs, like just a lot of stuff changed. But at the same time, they had a much more family-oriented culture at the time. Like they didn't have phones and computers, and like like everybody sat down for dinner at the same time with their families and watched TV together, listen to the radio or something. So like that's like a good example of how we're capable of coming together. But in the context, like in the setting, it's like we're a lot different now than we were 60 years ago.
And I don't think it's better to push back at all, because if we have the same population we have now, let's say like in the industrial age, when they were just using fossil fuels and they had no idea what like damages it did to society, they had no idea of controlling it. Like if we put 7 billion people then, the world would be a lot worse off than where we are now. Because, I mean, you can't think of it as, you have to think of it as a trend between the growth of the population and society. Like, we can't have 7 billion people in a different time period than we had like 50 or 100 years ago, because it would be a lot different than we would have it now. It probably wouldn't work out as much. We need to have that advancement, and we need to be pushing forward in order to, like, sustain this many people.
Like in the 50s, since the 50s, like people smoked a lot and they, didn't wear seatbelts, but the government put in place laws, and people were made aware of like how dangerous it was to constantly smoke and to get in a car without a seatbelt on. And do you think it's the government's responsibility to kind of push us towards like sustainability, like they did with implementing seatbelt laws and while they're smoking? Do you think it's their responsibility to like push us towards what's better by implementing laws and stuff?
Yeah, but this could happen. You don't want that, so it's not too
right, because we know for sure what would happen if we did something. Like,
I just feel like sustainability is a bigger, not that it's a bigger public issue, but I feel like if they can implement laws about like personal things like seatbelt safety, that's something that affects it obviously affects everyone, but like it's more on an individual basis. Whereas like sustainability affects everyone as a whole. It's less on an individual level. So if they can implement policies to require us to be more safe as individuals, I don't see why they can't implement policies to make the whole world more.
And I wouldn't know if I would call it necessarily their responsibility, because it's not something that they're like required to do, but I do think that their involvement would be crucial for our not relying so much on our current natural resources, maybe shifting to a more environmentally friendly method of getting water, electricity, power, stuff like that. I think they have to do something. I just don't. It's not something that they have to do. It's just it won't succeed unless they do. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
And this stated that there's a town or a community that, they get together and they trade goods and services and like have a giant yard sale and like trade everything. And that's like an example of how the community comes together to like provide without having to go out and spend a lot of money from like companies and stuff. Do you think that's a good idea to like have maybe go to your neighbor and say, hey, can you maybe fix this and I'll do something for you, rather than calling the repairman and having to pay for like that? Because that's when we get like more self-reliable and less reliable on big companies and stuff.
It sounds good, but then what happens when you have a company there, like laws in place that prevent, like, if the job's not done right, then, you have ways of, getting, not even, but like balancing that out. If we all just go to each other for things, I feel like that gets messy, like, oh, you do this right, or you owe me this. I just feel like it's like socially more, I don't know how to convey anything I'm trying to say.
I mean, like, we used to barter like exclusively. That used to be like, you know, the greatest system. I mean, not the greatest, but the only system that was used like in this country particularly. But I think the problem with trying to use a barter system right now is just the amount of people that there are right now. Like, our population obviously wasn't nearly as big as it is right now, and I think, yeah, like with that, like if we were to try and enforce a barter system with the, like, millions of people that occupy each part of this country, then it would just become confusing. And a lot of corporations would end up, like if we were to stop using certain companies altogether, they would crash, and like that could be a negative influence on the economy. Like when Lehman, I mean, granted Lehman Brothers was like, it's like a stock, like it's involved in stock, but when they crashed, it wasn't good for our economy. So,
it's hard to rely completely on your community because, I mean, right now you would have to know who's all in your community. And I know for, not my neighborhood particularly, but for a lot of neighborhoods, they really don't want to do that. If you live in New York, there's no way that you're going to go to your next door neighbor and ask them to like come in your house and repair something for you. And it has to do with the level of trust too. I mean, if you're in Baltimore, same thing. It has to do with the level of trust. And not everybody can trust who all is around them. So I mean, it is, in that respect, it is more reliable to go to your corporation because at least, again, like she said, you have some sort of safety knowing that they're not going to steal everything you have and then leave the country. You don't know.
And I mean, this is just like a prime example of how commercialism works, especially with like younger people. But I would rather buy or trust a company or product with a high, like a major company name on it than, you know, like its exact equivalent just without that same company name on it, like the same brand.
But do you think it's that's something that we need to do, like get to know our community? And, you know, I don't even know my neighbor's name. I don't know who's living next to me. Like, do you think that's something we should do, like get to know our community and get more involved so that we do have that if we need it?
That's really easy in some places, like keep saying in others, because how do you, like a place like New York City, how do you accomplish that? Like, I don't know, it's so, the population, the amount of people is so dense, and like, there's so many different, I just feel like a sense of community would be really hard to build in somewhere like that.
It definitely depends on where you are. Like, I've lived half my life in New York, and I've lived half my life in New Jersey. And in New Jersey, like, just like, for example, with like the hurricane, everyone came together to like work on that, and like it's easy to accomplish that, just sort of like depending on the part you're in. But if I went somewhere in New York and asked somebody to like fix something for me, I would get smoked. Like that wouldn't end well. So it definitely, it would be a great shift to see, but you would have to try and implement it in the right parts.
I also think transportation is a major factor in that because nobody like walks from especially even from my place, for example. I can't walk to anything unless I walk like 2-3 miles, and there's no way I'm going to do that every day where I can just drive to something that's probably like 5 miles away. It'll take me even less time than it would take you to walk for 2 miles, and I'd go to like a commercial place that would have something that I wanted and that I trust more. I mean, people with jobs, nobody's has a job that's like right beside you unless you live in like a city where you can just walk to it and you're in a park. I mean, other than that, people drive to their jobs and stuff like that. So in that respect, you don't really need to get to know your neighbors. I mean, it would be nice to know the people right around you in case an emergency is happening, but you don't need to know your community in order for you to have like a happy, successful life.
I just think the community does not argue like that right now, and it's hard for them to become like that. Like I know, like there's like small towns and like places like Costa Rica, and they like literally are like this. Like they'll walk like across the road and like their neighbor's house to get like anything. They do it with everyone, but I could never see it. It's not like my neighborhood, we don't know each other, but I could never see people being like they are there. And I don't, it's just the way we live already, and people really don't change that much once they're set in there.
I mean, it makes sense. People have to work both lives.
Okay, so we only have like 10 minutes left, so I'm just gonna like summarize what we went over. That like it would be hard now to implement like a strong sense of community and rely on the other people in the community and kind of just easier to go and rely on, you know, corporations and stuff, like big businesses, to provide you with products because you already know they're reliable.
Right, that are relevant to mine.
It's on there.
I think it would be inappropriate for us to give up at this point. That's kind of what it sounds
Oh, it's okay. It's not. I just.
As a group, getting to the consensus that we should give up. When the other day we, more or less, for 2 days in a row, we came to the consensus that action is necessary. But I'm not sure what transition happened.
I feel like we've exhausted.
We reached the point. Talking about it.
That was like a very sharp drop off.
Well, I have a question for you guys, right? And some of it has to do with things that you guys mentioned.